Hello, and welcome everyone to the National Geographic BioBlitz After School series. This is the first webinar in our three-part series about connecting youth to the outdoors. This year, for educators teaching in school, out of school, and virtual or socially distanced or in person, we want to provide you strategies and tips for connecting youth to nature. I want to thank the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation for making this series possible. While the series is designed for after school educators, we do think that these strategies and tips are applicable to any education environment and any teaching environment. And we hope that you find some of these useful. It seems that we have folks joining from all over the world, which is really exciting to hear. We think that these tips and strategies will be useful all over the world too. So for the next hour, we are going to focus on how BioBlitz activities and a BioBlitz can connect youth to nature through observation techniques and through conducting species exploration. We'll take a particular focus with the app Seek as a tool for doing that. This video will be available here on our National Geographic Education YouTube channel if you'd like to view it or share it later. We'll also be sharing some of the resources in a follow-up email and a link to this webinar recording. If you haven't yet, please say hello in the chat. We're so happy to see you all here. My name is Carmen Ortiz, and I work at National Geographic. I am happy to bring these types of series to educators just like you to ensure that you have the tools that you need and the strategies to inspire the next generation of explorers. I'm here today with BioBlitz education expert and educator herself, Peg Kiner. Peg, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, friends from around the world. I'm Peg Kiner. I'm the Director of Innovation at GEMS World Academy Chicago and a 2019 National Geographic Citizen Science Fellow. Hopefully in the chat, you've already included who you are and where you're from and what you're teaching. Carmen, do you want to share something else?
Yeah, I want to let everyone know that in the chat, we're also joined by 3 additional supports. We have Mary Ford, who's National Geographic staff. You'll see her in the chat answering questions, as well as our other BioBlitz education experts, Ann Haywood and Carlos Velasco. They know all about this space and can answer any of your questions as Peg and I are talking, but we will have a Q&A section at the end. So if you have specific questions for Peg, we will get to that at the very end of our time together. And with that, Peg, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Carmen. As you heard in the last webinar, we talked about BioBlitz, and I want you to know that all of our activities and guides for BioBlitz are available on the National Geographic website. So an overview for what we're going to talk about today. We want to make sure that you can connect to nature with your students. We're going to look at what is the Seek app. We're going to talk about noticing nature and get a little practice. We're going to try out some observation techniques. We're going to learn about all the ways that you can explore species through using the Seek app. For right now, it's your turn to share. So I want you to think and share in the chat. Do you remember a time when you noticed something in nature that made you excited? While you share in the chat, I'm going to tell you about this frog that you see on the right. I love going to the forest, and through the observation techniques that I'll show you today, I've trained my eyes to see things. And I tell you, I've lived in Chicago my whole life, and I've never seen a frog. And this is the first frog that I'd ever seen in the forest. I could always hear them, but I can never see them. So I was so excited to catch this glistening frog enjoying the sun. Now, please tell me, what makes you excited? What's something you noticed? And place that in the chat. If any of my friends that are running the chat in YouTube share one memory or one note that someone has decided to let us know about? Oh, I'm seeing that. Dakota, you saw a mouse tunneling through the snow? Oh my goodness, that's really exciting. I can't even imagine. How big was that mouse? How deep was the snow? David sharing about squirrels. Yes, especially during the pandemic, I became squirrel obsessed. There are so many squirrels. And through the Seek app, I actually learned what species there are, that there are multiple kinds, at least where I'm from. Oh, Melanie, yes, the smell of flowers. And there's so many, and they each have such different scents. Why? Why do they each have this different scents? I love it. Thank you for sharing those times that made you excited. The things that you notice, the things that make you passionate, want you to keep going back out. That excitement is what we want to share with our students. And we can cultivate new practices, new observation techniques to help them really deeply connect and look closely at nature. So why? Why did we use these apps to gather more information? Well, this is one of my favorite quotes, one of my favorite books that I always come back to by Zaretta Hammond called Culturally Responsive Teaching. And I think deeply about how language is powerful. And when you're able to name a thing, it moves out of the realm of mystery and into concreteness. And oftentimes when we are in nature, it's the background of our lives. And how do we able to make it the foreground where we're seeing it? And one way we can do that is through naming things, that everything has a name. One of the most powerful things I've learned through using this app is that everything has a name. And as you keep scratching the surface of species, you learn that there are common names and scientific names, and you learn that there are indigenous people who have their names for these items and species too. There's so much depth to knowing the name of the things that are around you. And Seek is a tool that helps us identify and connect with those deeper stories of the things that are in our environment. It not only lets us identify, but it gives us some history, some understanding of its connectedness to our world. So let's learn more about how we can use the Seek app and some of the other elements. So you can learn about the organisms around you. You can also earn badges as you keep collecting and seeing new species. You can explore species that are in your area, where when you land in a city, it'll show you the things that you should have your eye on as you look around. And there's challenges that will keep you motivated into continuing to seek new species out. So here's how it works. You hold up your iPad, iPhone, Android. It's available on all those devices. And you touch on the camera button and you just hold it above what you're looking at. And the Seek app will automatically produce a species name. You might have to move it around a little bit until you get exactly to species, but it uses the camera function to give you that species name. And once it gets down to species like we're seeing in the video, then you get information about the species. And you also get your first badge. Let's learn more about what are these other elements? What does it share with you after you find the species? Well, first of all, the reason that I love using this around my area is because you find the craziest things. When I'm in the forest, what the Seek app allowed me to do was to find something I didn't know existed. Just like our friends in the chat were talking about the mouse tunneling into the snow, check out what I found in a Chicago forest. So I was hiking through the forest and suddenly, what did I see? That's right, there's cactus in Chicago, eastern prickly pears. I found this in a forest and I only knew what it was because of the Seek app. I've never seen a cactus in this area in my whole life. It's so amazing that this app can help you connect to things in your area that you didn't even know about. So once I found that this was here, I had so many questions. Like, is it native? It turns out that that cactus is actually a native species to our area. So what the Seek app provides when you find your species is it tells you if it's a native species or if it's an introduced species. It will also tell you things like its scientific name. It will describe it. It shows the taxonomy, the family that it's from. And then it shows you the seasonality. And you may say, why do I really need to know the seasonality? Well, one time at recess, we found 30 stink bugs in our recess area. And the seasonality gives you this clue into thinking, okay, is there a burst when the species come out at one time, like a migration or a movement or awakening from dormancy? Or are they here all year round? It helps you ask that question of why is it there? Those great think like a geographer questions. Where is it? What is it? Why is it there? So once you find your species, you gather this information, you can start collecting badges. As soon as you collect your first one, you get a badge. And for each kind of species you acquire, there are badges for each of those. What this does is opens our eyes to seeing there are different species all around us, fungi and arachnids and birds. Instead of seeing nature as one whole thing outside, we start to see the individuality of all the things around us. And there are different challenges for each month. So it will help you focus your eyes as the nature around you changes to the things and environment and climate. So this is from a September 2020 challenge. And notice on the bottom, it shows your mission. And this is what you need to do in order to gather the badge. This is a pretty complex mission. 10 plants, 1 mammal, 2 species. But notice how it's trying to get you to diversify your looking, to make sure that instead of focusing on one thing, you're scanning around your environment to find all the different species that are there. We have some new Seek badges that are sponsored by the National Geographic Society. And these badges are really, I think, a welcoming badge because in this first one for March, it's just identifying 10 species. We just want you to go outside and start looking, start seeing, start finding these species around you. Super exciting. I wonder what that badge image is going to be. You'll have to find 10 species to find out. So there we go. Oh, this is what I wanted to show you. On the far, this last one, do you see it on the right-hand side? This is me getting part of my first species on the new Nat Geo badge. I found a crocus right out front of my house, but now it's covered in snow. It's so crazy out here. Oh, this March weather. So what we need you to do this March is to go outside and find 10 species, and you can start gathering, and you'll start to notice your progress as you start seeing all of the new species around you. And you may say, Peg, but I live in a big city. It's hard to find nature. Well, what's wild is that the Seek app will let you and open your eyes to start seeing nature all around you in unexpected places. Sometimes I just hold the app up to things that are different colors, to things that are green, because if it's green and it has shape, it has a name. It's a plant, it's something. And Seek helps you find out what that is. One of my favorite books to help me craft and grow my capacity for looking is called Slow Looking by the author Sherry Tishman. And she's from Harvard University's education program called Project Zero. And her thinking routines have really helped me start to hone in my noticing skills. And she says, the more you look, the more you see. Now, this is a speed bump from my alley, and I've walked at this thing 100 times, but it wasn't until I started using the Seek app that I started to notice the plants that emerged out from under it. And sure enough, I was able to find out their names and think, why are they there? So under the bumps of speed bumps, in the cracks of the sidewalk, the more you look, the more you see. In this, I see that there's moss. Oh my goodness. There's so many different kinds of moss, and it grows in the wildest places. And this is one of them, in the cracks in the sidewalk. So here we see multiple species. We see moss and the greater plantain. This is just in the cracks. So I'm telling you, you can use the Seek app and find new life and new places that you didn't expect. But we're going to practice some of this slow looking and noticing. These are 2 pictures, 2 photos that I took while investigating the forest. And I want you to practice your noticing skills. So you can, step 1 is to choose a photo. And I want you to start to name the things you see. So name 10 things you see in either photo 1 or photo 2. Sometimes I ask, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? Choose a photo and tell us what you see. Feel free to go ahead and share in the chat. I want to see what you notice because there are some secret things that are hiding in these photos. What do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? These thinking routines and strategies are tools that you can use with anything from art to a single object, but it's getting people to really harness and focus on a single thing and think deeply, scratching the surface. Oh, Kara, I see snakeskin moss. Yes, there are. Yeah, that's snakeskin. I was so surprised when I found that, and it made me ask more questions. How big is the snake? Where does it go? We see leaves and live grass and dead grass. There's something super secret in the second photo. I wonder if someone will find it. Okay, thank you, friends, for sharing what you noticed in the photos. Some of the things that you mentioned are exactly the things that I noticed too, but there's something in number 2. We're going to get a closer look. Again, what I love about being outside is the surprising things that you start to see when you slowly look. It's a little tricky to see because of the camouflage, but this is a praying mantis. The long green praying mantis holds onto the plant and waiting for pollinators to come by. I spent a long time here watching this, but it was so easy to walk past, which is why we use these techniques with people to slow down and start to notice. So you can use these observation techniques for Seek in high-tech situations where the teacher has an iPad or an iPhone, or students are in small groups with people who have an iPad or iPhone or Android or device at all. Or you can do it in low-tech situations where you can go outside as a group, looking at your environment and scanning together. It's really about building up these observation skills together and having the conversations about what do we notice. Another feature of the Seek app is that it provides you this valuable information about where is this item and where is it located in relation to where you are. So remember that prickly pear cactus that I found in the forest? Well, I learned that it was a native species, and in the middle map, you see this is all the places that it's located. I was so surprised, one, to find it in the forest, but that it's located in so many different regions from where I'm from. You can also zoom out of the map and start seeing where your item is located around the world. Now, remember that seek data is pulled in from iNaturalist. So what we're seeing in these green dots is other people who've also identified this app by using iNaturalist or seek. So even though you may not see an item in your area, doesn't mean it's not there. Just means that people haven't used the app to upload the data to this site. There's so many opportunities for us to continue to contribute to this larger body of knowledge. Okay, the other exciting thing, I know you are tuning in from all over the world. We can actually compare cities and compare which species are in different areas at the same time. So for instance, this in the first left image is the species that were in Chicago. And I can swipe to the left to see all the different species that were available. And then you can select another city and compare and contrast, asking students, why do you think the species are different? What do we know about those locations? And the right, you can see if you swipe all the way over, the green checks show that those are species that we found. You can even touch on Chicago and zoom out and place your pin anywhere in the world to see what species are located in that city. So it allows an opportunity for students to select a city and look and see what species are available there right now, what species are visible. Another way that you can use this as you're practicing your noticing techniques is patterns. So we bring people outside, when we explore nature, we're really looking for pattern recognition because this helps us identify species. For instance, the shape of a leaf gives us so much information about what kind of tree it is. So one thing I like to do as we walk is to collect the leaves and start to compare and contrast. And you can do this with your students. And helping notice, one thing I like to think about is I think about the question, parts, purposes, and complexities. What is different about what we're seeing? What are the similarities and differences? Because those matter when it comes to species identification. This is one activity that you could do with your students outside as you compare one type of flower I have on the right or multiple kinds of leaves. So another example of high tech and low tech, right? So we can use our phones or whatever device you have to help identify, or you can look at your plant, be outside and start to draw and use that observational technique to help you identify your species. I love taking notes, doing short watercolors and counting. In this one, when we go outside, for palmate leaves like this one Ohio buckeye on the right, we're counting the leaves and making those observations and drawing those to come back. So again, this is how you can do species identifications in low tech or how you can do it in high tech. Another way that you can use this app in the field to really harness and focus your attention is from a National Geographic explorer named David Lichtwager. And I love this idea because outside can be so overwhelming. But what if you focus your attention on one cubic foot, on one small space? What if you watch that space over time? What would you see? So he used this amazing cube and he would do almost a BioBlitz where we're looking at all the species within the cube. You could do it with things like a hula hoop. You could do it, you can create the constraint that you want. Some people just use rulers to decide how big they want that space to be. But again, we're harnessing our attention to see what's inside. And this is what was inside at David Lichtwager. Look at all of the different pieces, all of the different items of nature that can be inside a space this small. We don't have to go out hiking in the woods to really look closely. We can use whatever small space we have in front of us to look deeply at the nature around us. This is that example with the rulers. Sometimes we create biodiversity plots. If you're in a situation where you need to have students spread out and apart, this might be a great idea for you to create your own spaces for safe biodiversity data collection. I like using hula hoops. You can use meter sticks, but you can decide the zones that you want people to be in as they're exploring and looking deeply. Again, it focuses your attention. So instead of being distracted by everything that's out there, you can look closely and notice the differences between the two. So looking in this example, this is where I found that cactus. But there are so many species that are overlayered, and on top of this, I could have spent an hour just in this one spot, examining all the different species. One more quote from another book I love, Vesper Flights by Helen McDonald. I really feel deeply about this idea of knowing the names and connecting to the story of the creatures. And I'll read this to you. When I learned the names of these creatures from the field guides, it was because I needed to know them in the way that I had to know the names of my classmates at school. Their diverse lives expanded what I considered as home, way beyond the walls of my house. They made the natural world seem like a pale of the complex and beauty of safety. They felt like family. How can we help students find a sense of belonging in the outdoors? How can we help them find family outside? And I think when you know the names of things and the story and how these things connect, you can really create a bond, a deep connection to their sense of place. So some activity ideas that we have are data collection. I love collecting data. You can collect on so many things. With my students, we collect data on the bugs we find or the leaves we find. Sometimes when we find ladybugs out here, we count the dots and we draw them. In this example, you could just do it with leaves or anything you find that's around you. So you're asking a question about the species in your environment, and then you're using color, shapes, and line to represent what you found. So you can do leaves, flowers, whatever is in your environment, the bark of a tree. The idea is that you're using these circles as a space for you to make observations and really collecting data on what you found. Maybe you're going on a color walk through your area and keeping track of all the different colors that you found. That's a great one to do in spring and summer. This is what it looks like. So I collected the data, we took photos, and then we do the observation. And this is the color walk. I love to take myself on a color walk, honestly, for SEL purposes too, is to feel good, to notice deeply, to identify what colors are available and which species is producing the most color. In this example, I was keeping track by gardens. I would go to garden 1, and in the flower, I was making circles to show and demonstrate which colors that I was noticing. So you can do it plot by plot in different gardens and different spaces, and asking, why was there only yellow flowers in the third garden, and why were there so many colors in the first garden? So these are noticing techniques that will help you get to deeper questions. The other idea is change over time. Many of us have spent a year at home in the same place, but we can use this idea of change over time to monitor our environment at different times of day. So you can keep track of species in the same area multiple times a day. Just like we had someone in the chat talk about seeing squirrels and noticing squirrels. This is what I was keeping track of. When were the squirrels coming to our house? When were the robins? When were the birds coming? So what you can do is choose different times of the day, each day, to go outside and document what you notice. So I use different colors and shapes to represent the animals that I was seeing in my backyard. So you can keep track of change over time in a space that matters to you. So this is another way that you can use the app, another activity, right? As you find things, as you accumulate your species, you're going to start to notice that there are native species and introduce. So one thing you could do is sort which are the native species and which are the introduced species. Remember, this will lead you down a rabbit hole of asking yourself, how many were there? Why? What's the story? How did the species get introduced to this area? Super fascinating. And it will possibly lead you to more service and more action to figure out how can we prevent this species from causing any harm to the area. So remember, as you get and collect your species, pay close attention to native and introduced. And if you are looking for resources to build your own content knowledge on species, one tool I would suggest is our National Geographic Explorer magazine. It's free to access, and it's at multiple grade levels for easy readability. There's one that will read aloud to students, and they go all the way up to pioneer level, which is a little bit for like older students in the higher upper elementary. They're great resources for building your own background and supporting your students' learning as you discover new species together. So doing this with students doesn't have to be costly, but when it comes to, there's a lot of DIY tools that you can use, like empty food containers as you find your bugs and specimens you want to investigate. It's perfect for observing and sorting and also taking the photo in Seek. So getting a really clear photo to see all of the shapes. You can also put your fallen leaves on a paper plate. Sometimes we would hold them and press them down so we could trace the shapes around it. It's also for using a paper plate outside for if you're really focusing on a single plot and you're finding all those little insects inside. Paper plate is great. Colored pencils and markers, observational drawings are so amazing. So if you have any tools that can provide some vibrant color, that would be awesome. Binoculars with paper towel rolls, also a good trick to really focus our attention, to really hone in our zone. And a flashlight. Oh, flashlights are great. Imagine, we always say moth to a flame. This is how you find all those cool bugs at nighttime. Using a simple flashlight will help you start to see what's out there. So we also have in our BioBlitz guide that there are species identification cards and data sheets. And again, you can use these to support your students as they find new things in nature. This is another low-tech idea where students can have this and draw their image of what they found. And you can use the information from Seek to populate these identification cards, and students can hold onto them. So Seek, eventually, you are going to need to transition from Seek to iNaturalist. And I want to tell you a story about when I had to do it. So I go outside every weekend and I use Seek in nature to help me understand what is around me, what's around my environment. And I found this goldenrod and this strange bulbous item on there. And it was really tricky because it didn't look like a bud. And Seek was having a hard time identifying what was this part of the plant. So in iNaturalist, I was able to take a photo of it, upload it, and in iNaturalist, there are experts on there that can help you identify these unique features of species. And this turned out to be flies. There are flies in there. It's a gall for flies. And as you start to look more, you're going to start seeing things that you've never seen before. So Seek is great, but eventually you will reach the top of Seek, the maximum amount. I think it's 300 species. It's pretty amazing. And you can only find a species once, where in iNaturalist, you can identify species more than once. So as you move away from Seek and into iNaturalist, you're going to use that tool for the experts and for answering some of those big questions that you have about the species that you found. Oh, friends, there's so much more to explore. Head to our Nat Geo Ed BioBlitz site to find videos and guides for your after-school activities or any way that you support students. I hope you found these resources helpful. And you can find all of our webinars and recordings and activity guides. And we have one more presentation next week on connecting youth to nature.
Thank you so much, Peg. This is wonderful. I do want to let everyone know that we are now entering our Q&A session. So if you have any questions for Peg, please put them in the chat and I'll be sure to elevate them to make sure she gets them. I do want to just say, Peg, first, thank you for sharing some of these strategies, really practical things that we can implement. And I love your stories about finding unusual species where you might not expect them. And I definitely did not see that praying mantis. So to anyone else who saw it, great observation skills. I think I need to slow down a bit. And I appreciate, Peg, that you mentioned that observation, takes time to slow down. If we slow down to observe, we might notice things we might not have before, be introduced to new species. My first question for you is if you have any advice or strategies for working with students that might find it difficult to slow down and observe, or take that time to uh, really deep dive into what their surroundings and environment is.
Absolutely. This is a skill that we are growing the capacity in students, and I think even in ourselves. So, something that I challenge people to do, whether yourself or with your students, is to choose one thing to look at. And if you're working with small children, even any age, I'll give people a choice on what they would like to really closely notice. So, you're thinking things that are natural pieces of wood, an acorn, a leaf, but collect some things that are from nature and allow your students to spend time with them. And, I challenge people to do observational drawing because it really makes you slow down and notice the edges. And then ask them to talk about it. You want part of the excitement, and you can feel it from me, is sharing this, is sharing the surprising things you notice and what you wonder. So give them tools, give them an object to look at, give them space to draw, and give them time to share out what they notice and allow time for other people to share back what they see. So the strategy I used for you in some of the pictures was like, what are 10 things you see? And normally from Sherry Tishman's book, you would want to do this in a group. Each person would do it on their own, and then we would share out, and then we would do it again. So part of this is, talking as a group is really important to helping people focus.
I love that reminder of connection and sharing what we see. And we certainly loved seeing everyone commenting and chatting on this video what they see, to continue that conversation around observation. My next question is about the logistics of the Seek app, and if there are any security concerns if using the app with young students, and privacy issues.
Great question. And this comes up, and I love it because I support students, 3-year-olds and up. So COPA laws, all that's very important to me, protecting students' privacy. And I think that's why Seek is one of the best apps to start with. It's because there are no logins, there's no user information in the app. So once you turn it on, it's ready to be used. And that's the big difference between Seek and iNaturalist, is that iNaturalist, there's an email, there's a login. So that's not an app that you're going to use with young students. As we're exploring nature, you want to use the Seek app because it doesn't collect personal identifying information, and it doesn't. There's no way to talk to another community. But because of that, the information you collect is only yours. It's not sent out to the larger scientific community. So it's something to note that if you want citizen science where you're contributing to the larger body of knowledge, that's iNaturalist. If you're looking for honing your observation techniques and collecting information about species without contributing to that big body of knowledge, that's the Seek.
Great, that comparison is really useful. I know a tailored tool for younger students and older students is helpful, but in both cases, there is real science and real observation happening.
Oh, absolutely. Seek uses the data from iNaturalist to populate that species information. It's just a great starting tool, honestly, for anyone just starting out. It's a great tool to help you start seeing things around you.
Thanks. I have another question about the actual Seek app and if it requires Wi-Fi or data connection, and maybe some other tips for using it offline. I know you mentioned before using some of that data to populate some of those worksheets we shared too.
Great question. I may need to do a double check on this one, but I don't believe you need to have Wi-Fi on when you're using it outside. And perhaps my other Seek experts in the chat maybe confirm this one. But the other idea to think of too is that we actually tried this on our last webinar, but if you're teaching virtually, it can also work virtually, where if you show a species image and students have a device at home, they can connect that way too. Good question. I might grab my item right now and just test it out.
And while you're doing that, I'll share for those watching either live or the recording, that you can actually use the app to take a picture of some of our National Geographic images on the screen right now to identify species. It's a great tool for connecting virtually, like Peg said before. Another virtual way to connect is through online with sharing your maybe patterns or drawings from observations. And Peg, can you share more tips about connecting virtually and using the app, or some of that sharing you mentioned before?
Yeah, first, let me just tell you that it does work without Wi-Fi. I'm trying it out right now just to test for you. Also, something else we do when I'm, as you're thinking through logistics of using with kids, oftentimes when we go outside or we're really starting this project, we're just trying to see things. So sometimes when we go out, we're just taking photos of the things that we notice. And sometimes we're not using the app at all because you can upload photos later. So if you have a great photo that you took on vacation and you want to now use the Seek app to identify what that flower was or what that bird was, you can do that. So you can access your library of photos and able to identify and add those to your Seek account. And when it comes to sharing, again, the joy comes in sharing what we notice. The joy comes in the storytelling about what we see, and sharing it with the world and the interconnectedness of why are we seeing it right now. So definitely, if you were on Twitter, please share out your items on Twitter and tag Seek by iNat because they love sharing about what users are seeing. But remember for your students, the power of storytelling of when do we notice something is coming to our environment? Here's something to test. So our 3-year-olds right now are really into nests. They're obsessed with nests. So every day we go on a walk around the park and they're counting the nests that they see in the trees. And at first there was only 2 nests and now there are 10 nests. So sometimes when you're starting to notice nature, you may not see the animals there, but you see the evidence of the animals. So it's a building technique before we get on there. So you can take students outside to notice and just take pictures and upload it later and investigate what you found, or you can use the app in the field. There are lots of ways you can make this app usable for you.
And Peg, for those who may not be able to use the app for a variety of reasons, where do you suggest starting then to be able to have that same observation, skill development, that slow down for social emotional learning benefits, and in a variety of spaces? Where is a good place to start?
Oh, I love it. So there are so many things you can do with this. For instance, like if you're teaching your program and you don't have the tech to use for this, maybe you can select a species, or your students can select a species that you're interested in exploring together. Maybe it's birds in your area or flowers, and you can practice together by looking at an image, just like the images we have here. For instance, this beautiful hummingbird. It kind of reminds me of an Anna's hummingbird, which have the glorious pink on the bottom. But you can use single images to then practice these techniques. So like the 10 by 2 that I told you about, where you find 10 things and then you share 10 things and then you do the activity again, or using techniques like what do you see, what do you notice, what do you wonder. Those are actually thinking routines from projects Harvard's Project Zero. So all of those thinking routines are free and online, and you can use those on any image. You can use those on art. They're really fantastic. So I definitely start with practicing thinking routines. That, to really make the Seek app useful, you have to learn to see. So before you even go outside, start practicing. Start with a single image. And what do you notice? Oh, how about the squirrel on the bottom? So it's kind of had auburn or amber colors. And that's a big differentiator with squirrel species, right? Seeing that difference is going to help you notice if it's a gray squirrel, or a different kind of squirrel in your area. So practice with one picture at a time, and then asking those questions to then cultivate those deep, slow-looking skills. We're building the capacity of noticing one image at a time.
I love that. And a great way to do it virtually too, even noticing with images if you're unable to go outdoors, as everyone's weather environment and outdoor environment is different. So that's really useful. And I love that example with the squirrels, since sounds like we have some experience in the chat with squirrels. And I think that's a great question for anyone living in an urban area where there are many squirrels. Why is that squirrel there and not other species? So that's really helpful. Thank you, Peg, for sharing. So I'm going to wrap up our Q&A session here. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. Thank you again, Peg, for these amazing tips and strategies. There was so much shared here. It is so useful and really applicable. On behalf of National Geographic, I also want to thank those in the chat, Mary Ford, Carlos Velasco, and Ann Haywood for answering questions. And I also want to thank all of you for watching and joining here today and joining our National Geographic mission to cultivate empathy for the earth and connect youth to the outdoors. We are so thankful for educators like you inspiring our next generation of explorers. I also want to thank again the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation for making this series possible. And if you are interested in learning more about BioBlitzes and activities for connecting youth to nature, we're going to drop a link in the chat of our BioBlitz webpage, where you can also register for the next webinar. And I also want to mention that we will have a survey where you can tell us how this went. Give us some feedback. We love to hear from you. We'll be selecting 2 people to win a gift card, 2 people who are taking the survey, and we'll be sharing a gift card with them. But really, we just want to hear how this went. We want to make sure we're delivering resources and webinars that are useful to you. So let us know some of that feedback. Thank you again, Peg. Thank you everyone for joining. We will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered with a link to this recording, and you can find it here on our National Geographic Education YouTube page. Thanks everyone. Bye.